Greetings, Guardians, my name is Byfear. So, Heresy Act 1 has finished up and we've got to see the form in which Oryx returned to us this episode. He is in some ways quite literally a shadow of his former self, with his memories having been dredged up from the Echo and the Dreadnought. He cannot take physical form and he doesn't have his complete recollection of what happened for a large part of his life. However, in most other ways, that whole idea of him being a shadow of his former self is the total opposite of the reality in front of us. As someone who's been exploring Destiny's story and lore for the better part of a decade, and for whom the Books of Sorrow were a foundational part of my journey into the lore of this franchise, I can say this: Heresy absolutely nails Oryx's character. It nails it so much that it makes me question a lot of what might have happened to Oryx in his later years of life past the Books of Sorrow. Moments that might have led him to changing his ways. Moments that led him to his fatal confrontation with the Guardians of the Lost City. Moments that we have not seen yet, which might eventually be revealed. So today I just wanted to talk about Oryx for a little bit, and talk about some of the moments we see in Heresy where just, oh my god, it's absolutely nailing Oryx as a character. I also wanted to discuss Oryx's character generally, and what we've learned about this new Echo of Navigation that represents him in his current form in the game. There's also a lot of questions that are raised by that as well, so we're going to address some of those too. Starting off, I think we need to point out some facts about this version of Oryx known as the Memory of the Navigator, or Echo of Navigation. This is a memory of Oryx that has basically been frozen at a specific point in time. It's a memory that has only just ascended to Oryx and to the position of the Taken King. Remember that Oryx was previously Alrix, before he slew Akka, the Worm of Secrets. This means the Echo of Navigation is essentially Oryx from the Books of Sorrow, all the way up until probably verse 3.8, maybe 3.9, maybe 4.0, depending on the circumstances. This is actually pretty critical because it means that we can point out some things that Oryx just doesn't have knowledge of, or memory of for that matter. Let me give you one of the more critical examples. The big one is that Oryx has no recollection of his progeny. In particular, he doesn't remember Crota. Listen to what he says about this here.
I'm told that in my life I had a son. Crota, my sister tells me, came to your only moon and hollowed it with his throne. When you destroyed him, I brought my dreadnought to bear my high war upon this system. Is that what drove me here? Sentimental revenge? A waste of my logic. The dead deserve extinction.
So this is pretty crucial all on its own, because a lack of understanding of major events within his own life is going to leave this version of Oryx blindsided on a regular basis and asking a lot of questions. We'll get back to that in a moment, but I want to narrow our focus to start with, and specifically talk for a second about Crota and, well, Oryx's children. For a long time, Crota's death was supposed to be Oryx's casus belli against us. The reason he came to the system was always meant to be revenge for his dead son. At a certain point in time, though, during the Season of the Witch, there's a recording with Savathun and Xivu Arath pointing out the hypocrisy here. Oryx himself pointed it out in the last recording, but it's only further reinforced in this moment. The idea that Oryx seeking revenge for Crota was a foolish idea, and is not consistent with the sword logic, is the main thrust of all this. Take a listen to this.
I heard you Guardians got a lesson in sword logic today. You think you can defeat Xivu Arath with philosophy? Right. Let me show you something. Savathun kept records, and I took a look at what she had on her sister. Got a recording from way back, just after you Guardians drop-kicked Oryx into Saturn's orbit. Call it a primary source for your little research project.
Our brother is dead. I will take my revenge as he sought for his son.
Revenge? For what? The dead deserved to die. That's your own logic. Oryx was a hypocrite, and so are you.
He our deaths a study. And she who has endured, who sharpened the sword of his defeat, has done the same. She will take up his mantle. When she is paired to her true shape, we will meet her on the bladed path.
What a vain child you are. Or it spoiled you rotten. Not everyone wants to be like you. And you won't always get your way.
I will test my strength against her brood, and she will prove our logic true.
The important thing to note is that the Oryx that we heard first is completely consistent with the Oryx that we read about in the lore. He doesn't care for his sons. So this leads me to the conclusion that maybe something happened within Oryx's later life that fundamentally changed him and made him reevaluate his interpretation of the sword logic, his choices generally, and, well, a bunch of other stuff. After all, in those last recordings, both he and Savathun were pretty adamant about the idea that Crota dying was, kind of a skill issue. He failed, he died, he deserved extinction, and he deserves no pity. Oryx is a hypocrite for coming along and trying to avenge him. So why did he do it? That leaves an interesting question, and I don't think it's entirely inconsistent within the lore, because this is stuff that we've experienced, that has happened, and which ultimately, I think, leads us to further legitimate questions about things. Because remember, the Books of Sorrow is not a complete categorization of all of Oryx's life. At a certain point in time, it stops, and there's just a big question mark about what happened between the end of the Books of Sorrow and what happened at the start of the Taken War. We don't know much about that time period. For what it's worth, I don't think the major event that might have significantly changed Oryx in this manner was him having children in the first place. We know, thanks to the events of Warmind and the lore surrounding that Oryx was willing to permanently banish one of his sons for heretical practices, including necromancy, and he was willing to remove all mentions of him from the total history of the Hive in both the World's Grave and all remaining artifacts and cataloging moments. There was not a single statuette left, except for one, which only remained because it was indestructible. He's also the same father that in the Books of Sorrow was recorded to have thrown his other son Crota into the Vex Gate system. All this was a punishment for Crota's ineptitude and for failing to safeguard his father's throne. And as he threw him into the Vex Gate system, well, Oryx left him with a few kind parting words. He told him to return home glorious or die forgotten. Yeah, Oryx was not a caring father. So what changed him? What made him come to Sol in the first place? That's a major question that arises from all of this in my mind, and I think that there is a legitimate explanation somewhere down the road. It's a gap in Oryx's memories, or the memories of the Echo of Navigation, but also it's a gap in the story that needs explanation. And again, I don't think it's entirely inconsistent because Oryx's story, even 10 years later, is kind of incomplete. There are bits and pieces we just don't know. Moving on from the point of Oryx's sons and returning to our first point about the fact that the memory of navigation, the Echo of Navigation, has gaps in its memory, I think it's something that's worth pointing out here again. There are critical moments that the Echo does not know, and ultimately we can precisely point out the moment at which the Echo's memory kind of ends. There are notes about the lack of his memory of Crota, and there is of course this line from the Kludge mission which gives us something more specific.
I slain.
Sadly, yes, elder brother. You're just the memory of a dead god. The sword you always wanted to become.
I only just mantled myself by the death of Akka. Carved my throne from the worm's corpse.
Now, I think it's fair to say that one could interpret the whole idea of carving his throne from the worm's corpse as the creation of the Dreadnought, but I think that based on the commentary to do with Crota, that's totally wrong. Remember that Oryx pulled the secret of taking from Akka, and later did use Akka's corpse as baleful armor for the Dreadnought, but ultimately, the Crota comment means that that needs to be outside our chain of events, and I think it's much more likely that Oryx merely used the killing of Akka through sword logic to expand his own throne world. And for those of you who need a reminder, the chain of events goes something like this. Arca, the Worm of Secrets, was killed by Alrix. He then ascended into Oryx the Taken King. Oryx then raised his children, including Crota. Crota then created the breach in Oryx's throne world, and finally, this breach prompted Oryx to reinforce the throne world with the creation of the Dreadnought. So yeah, there's your complete timeline. This is why I believe the Memory of Navigation in front of us only has information that goes all the way up to the Books of Sorrows, verse 3.8 or 3.9. I think at very minimum we would see this Oryx having claimed the title of Oryx the Taken King. Maybe they would have lived to see the destruction of the Ecumene, maybe they would have lived to see more. The rest of it is a little bit shrouded in detail. But what we can definitely tell is that the memory cuts off before the creation of the Dreadnought and before the raising of Crota. With all that in mind, we know that this Echo of Navigation is missing a lot of crucial information about what happened to the actual Taken King. Events such as his second conversation with the Deep as recorded in the Books of Sorrow after the burning of Taisha Beth, Savathun and Xivu Arath's attempts to steal the Tablets of Ruin, the creation of the Dreadnought itself, Savathun and Xivu Arath leaving him at the Giftmast, the creation of his younger simulated copy by Quria, the invasion of Reese, the invasion of Sol, the Taken War. It's all just missing from the Echo of Navigation in front of us. It has no idea these things happened. I think the only reason it's able to freely refer to the Dreadnought is because, well, it sees the ship in front of itself. It's slammed into it. It understands the premise in which it stands for itself. There are going to be moments where this version of Oryx sits in judgment over his own past, future, real self. Man, that's confusing, but I hope you get what I mean. Sometimes when he passes judgment, he's going to do so just as he did with Crota. Other times, I think it's going to be really surprising to hear what he says, and I think he himself might be surprised. Like, something I've always wondered about is why he gifted Quria to Savathun. The Echo of Navigation doesn't know that, and it might be surprised to hear that, because the key word there is that Oryx gifted Savathun Quoria's remains. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Quria was basically a Vex Mind that Oryx took, which created a simulated copy of his younger self. This led to the idea that Savathun could use Quria as a means of controlling the Taken, because essentially she was controlling a simulated version of Oryx. Very complicated, that's the means by which supposedly she did it at first. It's a whole load of messy lore, but the important thing is Savathun and Oryx are not at this point in the stage of giving gifts to each other. They shouldn't be at all. The sword logic demands that you take, not that you receive a gift or gift something to someone else. So what the hell's going on with that? This is another one of those interesting mysteries that I'd love to see the Echo of Navigation react to. Because again, what happened there? I know that partly the reason why Oryx was giving it in the first place, as he claims in the Books of Sorrow, is so that Savathun can grow stronger and be tested by it because it's tricksy and cunning. But at the same time, he's gifting her that opportunity. She's not taking it for herself. So it's a bit of a weird one there, isn't it? The probable gap in the Echo of Navigation's memory also means that we might not have a means of picking Oryx's brain about one of the most important recorded conversations in all of Destiny's lore, and I don't mean that hyperbolically. I mean literally one of the most important conversations, because it is a conversation where Oryx spoke to the equivalent of God. This is the conversation in verse 4.2 of the Books of Sorrow, Majestic, Majestic. This is the conversation where he spoke to the Winnower for the second time. I say second, it's the first truly recorded one, but supposedly when Oryx became the Taken King and used Arca's power for the first time, he went into the deep and spoke to the deep itself. That conversation is not recorded, is literally what the Books of Sorrow says about that. It just says that when Alrix was done, he returned as Oryx. Anyway, the point is that verse 4.2, Majestic, Majestic, is one of the most important bits of lore in the entire game. And honestly, it's kind of interesting that we might not see any further note about that. It's a shame because this conversation is basically the thing that led to the creation of Crota and to the sundering of the tribute of Xivu Arath and Savathun. It's a hugely important conversation, and well, depending on the timeline of the Echo itself and how much it remembers, it might not know everything to do with that. We are able, of course, to potentially pick the Echo's brains about the first time that Oryx spoke to the deep. Again, This is what I described earlier. This is the moment when Oryx became the Taken King, and there is room for that conversation to be even more intriguing, because again, it was never recorded. And the first conversation between Oryx and the thing that he would one day end up calling something akin to his god outside of the worms, yeah, that can be dredged up potentially from the Echo of Navigation, and if it can, we get a unique insight into the Winnower. That is worth all of this trouble. I say that even knowing how crazy it is, considering that all of this trouble includes Eris dying, but honestly, I think she'd agree. We know sparse little about this next threat that we might face. If it is to be a threat at all, it might be something so monumental that it is merely a leering presence within our universe that cannot be destroyed because its existence is necessary. And if that's the case, then oh my god, we need to know more about this thing, just so we can understand how to stave it off, just so we can understand how to become an antidote to that thing. It is necessary for our very survival. So the Echo of Navigation in that regard is a very important figure. Whilst there's certainly a lot more to be said about this generally though, and about all the other bits and pieces that could come from it, there is one other thing I wanted to touch on, which is the most satisfying notes from the Echo of the Navigator, which are, of course, the conversations that it has with Xivu Arath. I know, Xivu's dialogue is still missing, and that is a tragedy, but ultimately when it comes down to it, the SAG-AFTRA strike is more important. That being said, the dialogue that has been written, and the dialogue that has been voiced by Oryx in return to Xivu's claims, oh my god, it's brilliant. To put it really simply, Xivu still wants her brother back. Desperately so. Back in the Season of the Witch, she welcomed Eris Morn into the Hive Pantheon because she believed that through Eris, Oryx might be reborn as his essence would be mantled once more. I think that's what we nowadays might call copium, especially given the epic consequences Xivu suffered for not dealing with Eris immediately. However, now with the Echo of the Navigator surfacing, Xivu is now more convinced than ever that we need to die for Oryx to return, possibly through the Echo itself. I say convinced, but I think that she's grasping at straws here. From what I read in the lore, and from the impression that I get at very least, Xivu reads like a bit of a wounded animal. Don't get me wrong, she has always been a pit of hate and rage, but now she's weakened and, philosophically, she's kind of lost. We destroyed one of the most foundational people in her life, and she is desperately trying to bring them back as a means of forging her own renewal. All this after we sundered her own throne world with the help of Eris, and destroyed the Witness, which she believed was the pathway to the final shape. The Hive's version and the Witness's version may well have been very different, but nonetheless, Xivu believed in the Witness and saw it perish. Needless to say, Xivu's plan to try and bring Oryx back is drawing a lot of criticism from her peers, and gunfire from us in equal measure. Our bullets might be painful and an actual barrier to her minions doing her bidding, but the real wounds are coming from the Echo of Navigation. They are the most painful words for her to hear. For example, take a listen to the words from Oryx that get put on display here. Keep in mind, Xivu's voice acting is gone, but for the moment her lines read, "You are here, with me, we may return to our path, we may rejoin our conquest." This is directly being stated to Oryx, the Echo of Navigation, and the Echo that is Oryx responds thusly.
Then test me, sister. Destroy me. Are you afraid that you will fail? Or are you afraid you will succeed?
Damn. As Arcturus Mengsk once put it, I love your gumption, son.
When you're in way over your head.
Anyway, the point is that the memory of Oryx in front of us is looking around at Xivu and is finding nothing but disappointment. Her attempts to bring him back are bound to be central to the rest of the episode, though. And why? Well, listen to Oryx name drop the episode right here.
We agreed. If something greater comes to destroy us, then we do not deserve existence. I must be what I am, and I am defeated. My logic is true. This is proof eternal, and yet you deny it. That, sister, is heresy.
So yeah, I think we know who the heretic in heresy is now, and I think we know what the act of heresy that is attempting to be committed is. I think it's Xivu, and I think the entire point of the heresy is trying to bring Oryx back from the dead. All of this is fascinating stuff to dig into, but I also wanted to make the point that Oryx as a returning character has been done brilliantly. There was a persistent meme, and I think it was a lot louder in the first few weeks of Heresy, which is the meme of somehow Oryx has returned. People, I think, were afraid of the Rise of Skywalker potential for somehow Palpatine has returned. The entire thing could have been very ham-fisted, just like the return of Palpatine was in The Rise of Skywalker. It could have just been something that sort of comes out of nowhere and is there merely to move the plot and to give people a bad guy. But much like with the return of Cayde 6, I think the narrative team has handled Oryx with a really deft touch. They've painstakingly made a consistent vision for his return and have framed it in a narrow context that's set the world on its head. It's one that has allowed certain actors to move in certain ways and has forced us to reevaluate things. More than just that, they've done a great job of respecting the lore of this franchise and how it has presented Oryx. Everything about him, from the characterization of his writing, to the viewpoints he presents, to the delivery of the voiceover, everything about it is spot on. If nothing else, I wanted to make this video just as a little excuse for me to gush about how awesome Oryx's return actually is. It was by far the riskiest part of Heresy's story, but it's been paid off, and it's been done splendidly so far, even though we're only one act deep. I'll say this too, I think it's even more impressive because of the fact that it really cycles around this big idea of the Hive Gods having a reunion. We haven't seen Xivu Arath in the flesh, and yes, her voice acting is tragically missing from this episode. But the premise, the idea, the motivational force for us to do something in this episode, and the way that this moves the world of Destiny forward, it's kind of undeniable. Even with the voice acting missing, this is the best episode. By a country mile, it's not even close. So yeah, all of this is for me to say, hey, that's neat. Anyway, if you want more Destiny content and you want more lore content from me in particular, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. And for those of you who are fans and who have been asking persistently, yes, I will be playing the new Monster Hunter. There is a plan for a T-Slape. We're already getting the gang together, don't worry. As for Monster Hunter lore, separate topic. Long story short, I don't know how I feel about just doing ecology videos, and there are always going to be people who have better access to sources than I do. I've made plenty of mistakes when it comes to covering the lore of that game in the past, and I'm not very keen to repeat them when it's not something that's easily accessible to me and something where I don't think I have enough subject matter to actually read up on it properly. There's like 3 or 4 times where I've contemplated doing this, and well, the one time I did do it, yeah, it was one of those moments where apparently a lot of my foundational knowledge that I just assumed was still correct has now been changed or something. I don't know. The whole point is I do not feel comfortable doing those kinds of videos. So I will think about it. I'll investigate more. Maybe there's a source or two that I'm just missing, but ultimately, don't hold your breath. You can definitely expect the T-Slape though. That'll be good fun. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you want more Destiny content or content from universes near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rhodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.